In the heart of Crestwood, a bustling city known for its towering skyscrapers and crowded streets, lived Police Chief Marcus Daniels. He was a man who had spent his entire career serving the people, always striving to make the city safer and fairer for everyone. Known for his strong moral compass and unwavering dedication, Marcus wasn't just another figurehead in uniform. He was someone people trusted. But lately, something had been gnawing at him. Rumors were spreading like wildfire about deep-rooted racism within the police department he led. At first, Marcus dismissed them as baseless gossip. After all, his team was diverse, with officers from different backgrounds working together under one roof. But the whispers grew louder, accompanied by formal complaints filed by minority officers and concerned citizens. They spoke of bias, discrimination, and even outright hostility from some members of the force. It troubled Marcus deeply. How could such behavior exist within an institution meant to protect and serve? The thought weighed heavily on his mind, keeping him up at night. Marcus knew that addressing these allegations required more than just reading reports or holding meetings. He needed to see it for himself, to step into the shoes of those most affected and experience firsthand what they went through. And so, after much deliberation, he came up with a bold plan. He would go undercover as a homeless person. No one else would know, not his deputies, not his family, not even his closest friends. This was a mission he had to undertake alone if he wanted to uncover the truth. Preparing for this transformation wasn't easy. Marcus spent days gathering old clothes, torn jackets, worn-out shoes, and faded jeans that looked like they hadn't seen a washing machine in years. He dirtied his face and hands with mud and ash, making sure no trace of his polished appearance remained. His neatly trimmed beard was left unkempt, and he wore a tattered hat to hide his identity further. When he finally stood in front of the mirror, Marcus barely recognized himself. For the first time in decades, he felt invisible. With nothing but a small backpack containing a few essentials, Marcus stepped out of his house and into the unknown, leaving behind his badge, his authority, and everything that defined him as police chief. He walked toward the part of town where many homeless individuals resided. The air smelled different here, musty, damp, and tinged with the faint aroma of garbage. People huddled in doorways, wrapped in blankets or cardboard, trying to shield themselves from the cold. Some sat silently, staring into space, while others muttered to themselves or argued loudly. As Marcus wandered through the streets, he began to notice things he'd never paid attention to before. There were makeshift shelters made of scraps, shopping carts filled with belongings, and graffiti-covered walls that told stories of struggle and resilience. He saw children playing among piles of trash, their laughter ringing out despite the harsh conditions surrounding them. An elderly woman sat on a bench clutching a cup of coffee she likely couldn't afford, her eyes hollow yet full of quiet dignity. Marcus found a quiet corner near an abandoned building and settled down, wrapping an old blanket around himself. As night fell, the temperature dropped and the world seemed to grow quieter. But sleep didn't come easily. Every sound, a distant siren, footsteps echoing down the alley, the rustle of leaves, kept him alert. He realized how vulnerable life on the streets truly was. Without walls to protect you or locks to secure your belongings, every moment felt uncertain. The next morning, Marcus woke up stiff and sore, his body unaccustomed to sleeping on hard concrete. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since starting his journey. He joined a line forming outside a soup kitchen, where volunteers handed out bowls of steaming stew and slices of bread. Standing there, surrounded by people whose faces bore the marks of hardship, Marcus felt a strange sense of camaraderie. These were individuals who had been pushed to the margins of society, yet they shared meals and stories with each other, finding solace in community. Over the next few days, Marcus immersed himself in this new reality. He listened intently to the stories of those around him. A young veteran named Jake spoke of returning home after serving overseas, only to find himself unable to adjust to civilian life. An older man named Walter recalled losing his job during the economic downturn and being evicted when he couldn't pay rent. A mother with 2 toddlers explained how medical bills had drained her savings, leaving her family without a place to live. Each story was unique, yet they all pointed to a common thread: systemic failures that left people stranded, without support. What struck Marcus most, however, was the way these individuals interacted with law enforcement. Whenever a patrol car drove by, tension rippled through the crowd. Eyes darted nervously and conversations ceased abruptly. Some people scrambled to gather their belongings and move away, while others simply froze, hoping not to draw attention. It became clear to Marcus that fear was a constant companion for the homeless. Not just fear of violence or theft, but fear of those sworn to protect them. One afternoon, as Marcus sat on a curb watching passers-by, a group of officers approached a nearby encampment, their voices carried across the street, sharp and commanding. "Pack up your stuff and get out of here," one of them barked. "You're blocking the sidewalk." The residents hesitated, unsure of what to do. When no one moved quickly enough, the officers began dismantling the tents and throwing personal items into garbage bags. Marcus watched in disbelief as a woman pleaded with them to stop, tears streaming down her face. Her cries went unanswered. It was then that Marcus understood why going undercover was necessary. Sitting in his office, reviewing statistics and listening to secondhand accounts, he had missed the human element, the raw emotions, the daily struggles, and the pervasive mistrust. Now, as he lived among the very people he had vowed to serve, he saw the cracks in the system he had helped build, and he knew that uncovering the truth would be far more challenging and dangerous than he had anticipated. Though exhaustion and discomfort plagued him, Marcus pressed on, determined to see this mission through. Little did he know that the hardest parts of his journey were still ahead, waiting to test his resolve and challenge everything he believed about justice and fairness. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus began to settle into the rhythm of life on the streets. It wasn't easy, far from it, but he learned quickly how to adapt. Every morning, he woke up stiff and sore, his body aching from sleeping on hard, uneven surfaces. The cold nights were especially brutal, and no matter how tightly he wrapped himself in his thin blanket, the chill always found its way through. Hunger became a constant companion, gnawing at him like an invisible force that refused to let go. He ate only when he could wait in line for free meals served by local shelters or churches, which weren't always available. The people around him noticed Marcus's quiet demeanor and unassuming nature. At first they kept their distance, unsure of who this newcomer was. But over time, curiosity gave way to trust. They started sharing bits of their lives with him, small talk about the weather, complaints about the lack of services, or stories about their pasts. Some spoke of happier times before misfortune struck. Others vented their frustrations about being ignored by society. Through these conversations, Marcus realized just how diverse the homeless community was. There were veterans struggling with PTSD, families torn apart by financial crises, addicts trying to break free from addiction, and elderly individuals abandoned by their loved ones. One person who stood out to Marcus was a man named Walter, a former construction worker in his late 50s. Walter had lost his job after injuring his back on site and couldn't afford medical treatment. Without income or savings, he'd been evicted from his apartment within months. Now, he spent his days scavenging for cans and bottles to sell for a few dollars. Despite his hardships, Walter remained cheerful, often cracking jokes to lighten the mood. "You gotta laugh," he told Marcus one evening while they shared a meal of stale bread and canned soup. "If you don't, the world'll eat you alive." Another regular face was Maria, a young mother with 2 toddlers clinging to her side. She worked odd jobs whenever she could find them, but still struggled to make ends meet. Her husband had left years ago, leaving her to raise the children alone. When rent became too much to handle, they ended up on the streets. Despite her exhaustion, Maria never raised her voice at her kids or showed signs of despair in front of them. Instead, she sang softly as they drifted off to sleep under layers of worn blankets. Watching her resilience made Marcus reflect on how much strength it took to keep going in the face of such adversity. Life on the streets wasn't just about survival, it was also about navigating danger. Marcus quickly learned that not everyone here was harmless. Some individuals carried anger simmering beneath the surface, lashing out at anyone who crossed their path. Fights broke out over scraps of food or territory, and Marcus had to be cautious not to get caught in the middle. Theft was common too. Anything left unattended, even something as simple as a pair of shoes, could disappear within minutes. To protect what little he had, Marcus kept his belongings close, clutching his backpack tightly even while sleeping. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of street life was the presence of law enforcement. Patrol cars drove by frequently, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Officers would occasionally stop to question people or issue warnings, but more often than not, their interactions felt hostile. Marcus observed how some officers treated the homeless with disdain, barking orders or making dismissive comments. One night, as he sat near a bus stop, he witnessed a group of officers confront a man digging through a trash can. "Get outta there," one of them shouted, shoving the man away. "Go somewhere else if you're gonna act like an animal." The man stumbled backward, muttering apologies, but the officers didn't seem satisfied. They lingered for a moment longer, glaring down at him before driving off. These encounters left Marcus feeling uneasy. As someone who had dedicated his life to justice, seeing members of his own department treat vulnerable individuals with such disrespect was deeply troubling. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong, not just with individual officers but with the system itself. Why did so many of them view the homeless as less than human? Where had this mindset come from, and why hadn't he noticed it sooner? Despite the challenges, Marcus found moments of humanity that reminded him why he had chosen this path. Late one evening, as rain poured down relentlessly, a young woman approached him holding a plastic bag. Inside were a dry shirt and a sandwich. "I saw you sitting here earlier," she said shyly. "Thought you might need this." Marcus thanked her, touched by her kindness despite having so little herself. Another time, a group of teenagers passing by stopped to share a cigarette with him, laughing and joking as if he were an old friend. These small acts of generosity showed him that even in the darkest corners of society, compassion still existed. However, not all experiences were heartwarming. On several occasions, Marcus witnessed outright cruelty disguised as authority. One afternoon, as he joined a group of homeless men gathered near a park bench, 2 patrol cars pulled up abruptly. Several officers stepped out, their expressions stern. Without explanation, they began ordering everyone to move along. When one man, a frail elder named James, protested, saying he had nowhere else to go, an officer shoved him roughly. "Don't argue with me, old man," the officer snapped. "Just do what you're told." James stumbled, his cane clattering, to the ground, and Marcus instinctively reached out to steady him. It was then that Marcus locked eyes with one of the officers, a man he recognized immediately. Sergeant Harris, a rising star in the department whom Marcus himself had promoted, stood glaring at the crowd. His tone was harsh, his words laced with contempt. "You think we don't know what you're doing out here?" Harris barked. "Loitering, stealing, causing trouble, that's all you're good for." Marcus clenched his fists, fighting the urge to reveal his true identity right then and there. But he knew better. If he blew his cover now, everything he had worked for would be ruined. Instead, Marcus stayed silent, watching as Harris and the other officers continued their tirade. They kicked over makeshift shelters, scattering blankets and personal belongings across the pavement. A woman cried out as her photo album, filled with pictures of her children, was trampled underfoot. No one dared to protest. They simply gathered what they could and moved away, heads bowed in defeat. As the officers climbed back into their cars and sped off, Marcus felt a mix of anger and shame wash over him. How had things gotten this bad, and how had he failed to see it sooner? That night, lying awake under the stars, Marcus replayed the day's events in his mind. He thought about James, whose dignity had been stripped away in front of everyone. He thought about the woman whose cherished memories now lay scattered in the dirt. Most of all, he thought about Harris, the man he had once trusted to uphold the values of the department. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a few bad apples spoiling the bunch. This was systemic rot, festering, unchecked because no one powerful enough cared to stop it. Determined to push forward, Marcus resolved to dig deeper. He needed to understand the scope of the problem, not just isolated incidents but patterns of behavior. What he uncovered next would test his resolve in ways he couldn't have imagined, but for now, he focused on surviving another day, blending in with the very people he had sworn to protect. Each passing moment brought new lessons, new insights, and new questions. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Marcus knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn back now. As the days stretched into weeks, Marcus continued to navigate life on the streets, his resolve growing stronger with each passing moment. He had seen enough to confirm his worst fears. There was indeed a troubling pattern of abuse and neglect within the police department he once led. But what truly shook him to his core happened one fateful evening when he found himself face to face with someone he never expected to encounter in this setting: Sergeant Harris. It began like any other day. Marcus woke up early, stiff from another restless night spent on cold concrete. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of rain that promised relief from the oppressive summer heat. After grabbing a quick breakfast at a nearby shelter, slice of dry toast and a cup of weak coffee, he wandered toward the bus stop where he often sat during the day. It was a quiet spot, tucked away from the main roads where he could observe without drawing too much attention to himself. That's when it happened. Two patrol cars screeched to a halt near the curb, their headlights glaring into the dimly lit alley. Out stepped four officers, including Sergeant Harris. Marcus recognized him instantly, the same man who had mocked and shoved James just days earlier. His heart sank as he watched them approach a group of homeless men huddled together, sharing a meal scavenged from a nearby dumpster. "Get up," one of the officers barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "This is private property. You're trespassing." The men looked up, startled. One of them, a wiry man named Carl, who Marcus had befriended, tried to explain. "We weren't doing anything wrong," Carl said, holding up his hands defensively. "Just eating some food." "Don't give me excuses," the officer snapped, kicking over the makeshift table they had set up using crates and cardboard. Food spilled everywhere, scattering across the ground. The men scrambled to pick up what they could, but the officers didn't stop there. They started shoving them around, yelling insults and accusations. Marcus watched in stunned silence, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He wanted to intervene, to demand answers, but he knew better than to blow his cover. Instead, he stayed, rooted to the spot, pretending to be just another bystander. That's when Harris turned his gaze toward him. Well, look who we have here," Harris sneered, striding over with an air of superiority. "Another one of you freeloaders, huh?" Marcus kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. He muttered something unintelligible, hoping to blend into the background. But Harris wasn't satisfied. He grabbed Marcus by the collar, yanking him to his feet. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Marcus saw recognition flicker across Harris's face. Though Marcus's appearance was drastically different, Harris clearly sensed something familiar about him. "What's your name, old man?" Harris demanded, his grip tightening. "You got a problem with how we do things around here?" Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. If Harris realized who he really was, everything would fall apart. Summoning every ounce of composure, he stammered out a fake name. John Smith." Harris studied him for a moment longer before letting go with a dismissive snort. "Whatever. Just keep your mouth shut unless you want trouble." Then, turning back to the others, he added, "All of you clear out. Now." The group dispersed quickly, not daring to argue further. As Marcus walked away, his legs trembling beneath him, he couldn't shake the anger boiling inside him. How could Harris, a man he had personally mentored and promoted, treat people this way? What had gone so horribly wrong? Later that night, as Marcus lay awake under the stars replaying the incident in his mind, he realized something even more chilling. Harris had recognized him. There was no doubt about it. The way Harris had stared at him, the slight pause before releasing him, it all pointed to one conclusion. Harris knew exactly who Marcus was. And if Harris knew, then others might suspect too. The thought sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. Going undercover had always been risky, but now it felt downright dangerous. If word got out that the police chief was posing as a homeless man, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for him, but for everyone involved. He needed to act fast. The next morning, Marcus decided to take a calculated risk. He approached Elena Rodriguez, a former nurse who had become one of his closest allies on the streets. Elena had been living rough for months after losing her job and home due to medical bills. She was sharp-witted and resourceful, qualities that made her invaluable to Marcus's mission. "I need your help," Marcus whispered, pulling her aside behind a row of abandoned crates. "Something's changed. I think they're on to me." Elena raised an eyebrow, her expression serious. "What makes you say that?" He recounted the encounter with Harris, leaving out no details. When he finished, Elena let out a low whistle. "That doesn't sound good," she said. "If Harris knows who you are, it's only a matter of time before others figure it out too. We need to be careful." Together, they devised a plan. Using a hidden phone Elena had managed to keep safe despite her circumstances, they began documenting everything. Whenever officers harassed or abused homeless individuals, Marcus would discreetly record the incidents. Elena helped gather testimonies from victims, ensuring their stories were preserved in case anything happened to Marcus. But the danger wasn't limited to exposure. One night, as Marcus returned to his usual sleeping spot, he noticed two shadowy figures lurking nearby. They wore hoodies pulled low over their faces, making it impossible to identify them. Instinctively, Marcus ducked behind a dumpster, his pulse racing. From his hiding place, he heard one of them mutter, "That's him, the guy causing all the trouble." His blood ran cold. These men weren't random attackers. They were sent by someone within the department, likely Harris himself. Realizing he was outnumbered and unarmed, Marcus waited until they moved away before slipping off into the darkness. He didn't sleep that night, constantly looking over his shoulder, expecting them to return. By dawn, Marcus knew he couldn't stay in one place for long. With Elena's help, he relocated to a different part of town, blending in with a new group of homeless individuals. It was exhausting, constantly moving and staying vigilant, but Marcus refused to give up. Every insult hurled by officers, every shove or kick delivered to defenseless victims fueled his determination to expose the truth. Through it all, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on how far he had fallen, from the respected leader of the police force to a fugitive hiding among society's forgotten. Yet, paradoxically, he also felt closer to the people he served than ever before. Their struggles became his struggles, their pain his pain. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Marcus Daniels would not rest until justice was served. For them, for himself, and for the institution he still believed could be redeemed. As Marcus continued his undercover mission, he began to notice patterns that painted a disturbing picture of corruption within the police department. What started as isolated incidents of abuse and neglect soon revealed themselves as part of a larger systemic issue, one that went far beyond individual officers behaving badly. It was a culture of indifference and hostility, carefully woven into the fabric of law enforcement in Crestwood. One observation stood out starkly. Certain officers seemed to target specific groups of homeless people based on their race or ethnicity. African American and Latino individuals were disproportionately singled out for harassment, while white homeless residents often received more lenient treatment. For instance, Marcus witnessed an officer casually chatting with a white man sitting on a park bench, offering him advice on where to find shelter services. Just moments later, the same officer approached a young black woman nearby and accused her of loitering, threatening to arrest her if she didn't move along. This double standard wasn't limited to verbal confrontations. Physical violence also followed racial lines. On multiple occasions, Marcus saw officers roughing up minority homeless individuals without provocation. One night, as he huddled near a group of men sharing a small fire to keep warm, a patrol car pulled up abruptly. The officers stepped out, shouting orders to disperse. When one man, a Latino teenager named Miguel, hesitated, unsure of what to do, An officer grabbed him by the arm and twisted it behind his back. "You deaf or something?" the officer growled, slamming Miguel against the hood of the car. The rest of the group scattered, leaving Miguel alone to endure the humiliation and pain. Through conversations with other homeless residents, Marcus learned that these weren't isolated events, but recurring behaviors. Many spoke of being stopped repeatedly for minor infractions like jaywalking or sleeping in public spaces, actions that rarely resulted in citations for white individuals, but frequently led to arrests or physical altercations for minorities. Some even claimed that officers planted evidence on them to justify arrests, knowing full well they wouldn't have the resources to fight back in court. What shocked Marcus most, however, was the casual racism embedded in everyday interactions. During shift changes, when officers gathered to exchange updates or share stories, derogatory jokes about homeless people of color were common. Terms like thugs and illegals were tossed around freely, reducing human beings to stereotypes. Marcus overheard one officer bragging about how many criminals he had cleared off the streets that week, referring specifically to Black and Latino individuals. Another joked about forcing addicts into rehab by threatening deportation, a cruel punchline considering none of the victims had committed any crime beyond existing in poverty. The corruption extended beyond personal biases. It seeped into financial dealings as well. Through Elena's network of contacts, Marcus uncovered allegations that some officers accepted bribes from local business owners to forcibly remove homeless encampments near their properties. These businesses, eager to maintain a pristine image for customers, paid off officers to intimidate or arrest anyone who dared set up tents or shelters nearby. In return, the officers turned a blind eye to illegal activities such as dumping hazardous waste or exploiting workers, all while claiming to uphold justice. Marcus documented everything meticulously, using Elena's hidden phone to capture videos and record testimonies. Each piece of evidence added weight to the growing mountain of proof that something was terribly wrong within the department. Yet the deeper he dug, the more dangerous his position became. Officers grew suspicious, whispering among themselves about a snitch lurking among the homeless population. Some even conducted random searches, confiscating belongings and destroying makeshift shelters in an effort to flush out whoever was gathering information. Despite the risks, Marcus pressed on. He couldn't unsee what he had witnessed or ignore, the cries for help echoing through the streets. Every interaction reinforced his belief that this wasn't just about bad apples, it was about a rotten tree whose roots ran deep. And as much as he wanted to confront Harris and the others directly, he knew exposing the truth required patience and strategy. One evening, as Marcus sat with Elena planning their next steps, she shared a revelation that sent chills down his spine. "I think I know why they're so desperate to silence us," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "It's not just about covering up racism or bribery. There's something bigger at play." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, leaning closer. Elena hesitated before continuing. "A few weeks ago, I overheard two officers talking about a deal involving vacant lots downtown. Apparently some big developer wants to buy them up cheap, but the homeless camps are in the way. If they can clear those areas quickly, they'll get massive payouts." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just corruption. It was greed masquerading as authority. The very people tasked with protecting citizens were exploiting their power to line their own pockets, sacrificing the vulnerable in the process. It explained why the crackdowns had intensified recently, and why officers were willing to go to extreme lengths to maintain control. As the pieces fell into place, Marcus realized the enormity of what he was up against. Exposing the truth wouldn't just embarrass a few rogue cops. It would dismantle a web of deceit connecting politicians, developers, and law enforcement officials. The stakes were higher than ever, and the danger more immediate. But Marcus also knew he couldn't back down. Not now. Not after coming this far. That night, as he lay awake staring at the stars, Marcus replayed Elena's words in his mind. He thought about all the lives destroyed by this system, the families torn apart, the dreams crushed under the weight of injustice. He thought about James, Maria, Walter, and countless others who had trusted him enough to share their stories. And he thought about himself, the man who had once believed in the sanctity of the badge only to discover its tarnished reality. By morning, Marcus had made up his mind. No matter the cost, he would bring the truth to light. Not just for the homeless community, but for everyone who deserved better from those sworn to serve and protect. The road ahead would be treacherous, filled with obstacles and enemies determined to stop him. But Marcus Daniels was ready. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, not as a figurehead or a symbol, but as a man fighting for what was right. As Marcus continued his mission, the bond between him and Elena Rodriguez grew stronger. What had started as a cautious partnership blossomed into a deep friendship built on shared purpose and mutual respect. Elena wasn't just an ally. She became Marcus's confidant, someone who understood the weight of what he was trying to accomplish and believed in its importance as much as he did. Elena's sharp mind and resourcefulness proved invaluable. She had spent months gathering information about the police department's misconduct before Marcus even arrived on the scene. Her knowledge of the streets and the people who lived there gave her access to stories and secrets that others might have overlooked. Together, they formed a plan to document everything, every abusive encounter, every bribe accepted, every racist slur uttered by officers, and compile it into undeniable evidence that could not be ignored. The two worked tirelessly, often late into the night, huddled behind abandoned buildings or under bridges. They whispered strategies and reviewed footage captured on Elena's hidden phone. Each video told a story. An officer shoving a black man to the ground for no reason, another planting drugs in a Latino teenager's backpack, yet another laughing with colleagues about how easy it was to clean up certain neighborhoods. The more they gathered, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't random cruelty. It was calculated oppression. But collecting evidence wasn't enough. They needed a way to get it into the hands of people who could make a difference. Elena suggested reaching out to a journalist she trusted, a woman named Lisa Chen, who had written extensively about social justice issues in Crestwood. Lisa had a reputation for being fearless, willing to take on powerful institutions when necessary. However, contacting her came with risks. If anyone found out, both Marcus and Elena could face retaliation. They decided to proceed carefully. One evening, after ensuring no one was watching, Elena slipped away to meet Lisa at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. She handed over a USB drive containing hours of footage and detailed notes. "This is bigger than you think," Elena told her earnestly. "It's not just about bad cops. It's about corruption at every level. You need to see this." Lisa listened intently, her expression growing darker as she scrolled through the files. When she finally looked up, her voice was firm. "I'll do whatever it takes to get this story out. But you understand the danger, right? Once this goes public, there's no turning back." Elena nodded. "We know. That's why we're trusting you." Back on the streets, Marcus and Elena prepared for the fallout. They knew exposing the truth would put them in harm's way, but neither hesitated. For Marcus, it was personal now. Every shove, every insult, every act of violence he witnessed fueled his determination to hold those responsible accountable. For Elena, it was about giving a voice to the voiceless, to all the people who had suffered silently for too long. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. Word spread quickly among the homeless community that someone was gathering intel on the police. Some were supportive, offering their own testimonies or pointing out areas where officers frequently harassed residents. Others were wary, fearing retribution if they got involved. Marcus understood their hesitation. He'd seen firsthand how brutal the officers could be. But he also knew that staying silent wouldn't change anything. One day, while sitting near a bus stop, Marcus noticed a familiar figure approaching. It was Sergeant Harris, flanked by two other officers. His stomach tightened as Harris locked eyes with him, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Well, well," Harris said, his tone dripping with mockery. "If it isn't our favorite vagrant." Marcus forced himself to remain calm, keeping his head down. He muttered something unintelligible, pretending to focus on tying his shoelaces. But Harris wasn't interested in small talk. He crouched down, grabbing Marcus by the collar and pulling him close. "You've been asking a lot of questions lately," Harris hissed. "People are starting to wonder what your game is." For a moment, Marcus thought Harris might blow his cover right, then and there. Instead, Harris released him with a shove, standing up and brushing off his gloves as if Marcus were nothing more than dirt. "Here's some advice, old man," Harris said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Mind your own business, or you might find yourself regretting it." The threat hung heavy in the air. As Harris and his men walked away, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced around, noticing several pairs of eyes watching him warily. The message was clear: stay quiet, or risk becoming a target. That night, Marcus confided in Elena about the encounter. "He knows," Marcus said grimly. "Harris knows I'm on to something, and he's not going to let me walk away from this." Elena placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Then we move faster. We can't wait any longer. If they come after us, we'll be ready." Over the next few days, they doubled their efforts, documenting as many incidents as possible. They reached out to Lisa again, urging her to publish the story soon. Meanwhile, Marcus began preparing for the inevitable confrontation. He memorized key details about the corruption, ensuring he could recall them even if he lost access to the recordings. He also made sure Elena had copies of everything, in case something happened to him. But the tension escalated sooner than expected. Late one evening, as Marcus returned to a secluded spot where he often slept, he spotted two shadowy figures lurking nearby. Their faces were obscured by hoods, but their intentions were clear. One of them held a baton, tapping it menacingly against his palm. Marcus froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He recognized the stance, the same aggressive posture he'd seen countless times during patrols. "Looks like we found our guy," one of the figures sneered, stepping closer. "Boss says you've been causing trouble." Marcus backed away, slowly, his mind racing. He couldn't fight them, not without revealing his identity. Instead, he relied on instincts honed from years of experience. Using the darkness to his advantage, he darted into a narrow alley weaving between trash bins and discarded furniture. Behind him, he heard the sound of footsteps chasing after him, followed by angry shouts. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he ran, dodging obstacles and leaping over puddles. The alley twisted and turned, leading him deeper into unfamiliar territory. Finally, he spotted a gap in a chain-link fence and squeezed through, emerging onto a busy street. Gasping for breath, he blended into the crowd, disappearing from sight. When he finally stopped running, Marcus realized he couldn't return to his usual spots. Whoever had sent those men after him likely knew where to look. With Elena's help, he relocated to a different part of town, finding refuge among a new group of homeless individuals. Though exhausted and shaken, he refused to give up. If anything, the attack only strengthened his resolve. That night, as he lay awake under a makeshift shelter, Marcus reflected on everything he had endured. He thought about the fear in the eyes of the people he sought to protect, the arrogance of men like Harris, and the courage of allies like Elena. He thought about the countless lives destroyed by a system designed to fail them, and how desperately change was needed. For the first time since beginning his undercover journey, Marcus allowed himself to feel hope, not because he believed the road ahead would be easy, but because he knew he wasn't alone. Together, with Elena, Lisa, and the voices of the marginalized, he had the power to expose the truth and demand accountability. The battle was far from over, but Marcus Daniels was ready to fight, for justice, for humanity, and for the soul of the city he loved.